Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Professor Purser, the toxicology expert instructed by the inquiry. So I think Professor Purser is there. Would you ask him to come in, please? Good morning, Professor Purser. Sit down, please, and make yourself comfortable. All right, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning to you, good morning, members of the panel. Professor Purser, good morning to you. I now want to ask you some specific questions about Section 6 of your report for Phase 2, where you've set out your analysis of the causes of incapacitation and death in individual cases. And I'd like to begin, if I may, please, with Floor 23. And if we go, please, to DAPR 5013, we should see a table which is a summary of toxicity endpoints for each flat on floor 23, which you showed us and explained a little bit of in opening your evidence yesterday.
Yes.
And looking at paragraphs 5 to 7, if we can scroll up the screen, please, to paragraph 5, you'll see there that you explain the three endpoints in those three paragraphs. And just to go through it, is it right that the first endpoint is the latest time that adult flat occupants could safely evacuate the flat?
Yes.
And then the second endpoint is the likely time to collapse and loss of consciousness for an average occupant in the flat?
Sorry, the first endpoint was the latest time they could leave the flat and still walk down the stair.
Yes.
Yes.
Walk down to the ground floor without collapsing and escape from the tower.
Yes. Yep.
The second endpoint, as you say, I think in paragraph 6, is the estimated approximate likely time to collapse and loss of consciousness for an average occupant remaining in the flat.
Yes.
And then the third endpoint is at paragraph 7, and that is the estimated approximate time by which a lethal dose, a threshold of asphyxiant gases, carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide, would be predicted to have been inhaled. And you say this precedes the actual time of death, which may have occurred at variable time later.
Yes. So that's the point where they passed the 50% threshold I discussed yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I'd like to start, if I can, with floor 23, flat 201.
Yes.
And you cover this at page 6 of DAPR 606. And this is table 20, which... I'm sorry.
Sorry, after you.
Table 20, which is entitled 23rd floor occupants by flat location with summary of movements and times of escape or approximate times of death. And you set out, and just correct me if I'm wrong here so that we can all understand what you've done, you've set out each flat on each floor with each occupant in the flat, and in red type you've identified those individuals who lost their lives and the rough estimated time of death, I think. Now, I'm going to ask you about the occupants first in 201, which you can see halfway down the screen on the right-hand side. And you have a number of names: Raymond Bernard, Hamid Khani, Debbie Lamprell, Berkti Haftom, Birak Haftom, Jessica Abane Ramirez, and Amna Idris. Now, you've set out your analysis for the available evidence relating to this flat from page 8 in section 6 of your report. And I just want to see if I can just pick through the main facts that you've referred to. Can we go, please, to page 16 in this report? Page 16, paragraph 52, under the heading Conclusions. And you say there that the occupants in flat 201 were exposed to increasingly dense smoke and asphyxiant gases for an extended period of time from about 1:30 to 2:24, a total period of about 57 minutes. And then at 53, you give some time points. First of all, about 1:29, significant smoke penetration from the lobby into the flat. Yes?
Yes.
And then about 1:36, the exterior fire affects the living room. Yes?
Yes.
Does that mean that it's burning the cladding structure on the outside?
Yes, it means it just moved across the column from the next door flat and starting to affect the outside of that flat.
Yes. And then you say from about 1:50 till 2 o'clock, the flat occupants remained able to engage in various activities despite those conditions.
Yes.
And then from 1:52 to 1:56, a period of about 4 minutes, the conditions deteriorated rapidly in the bedroom when the fire spread outside the bedroom.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Now, is it right then, building on that chronology, that the occupants of flat 201 could have escaped without difficulty if encouraged to do so before 1:29?
Yes.
Yes. And I think you say that at paragraph 54. And therefore, paraphrasing paragraph 55, from 1:29, is it right that occupants were inhibited from crossing dense smoke in the lobby of floor 23, but could have done so if encouraged?
Yes.
Yes. And then in the period 1:50 to 2:10, is it the case that the gradually accumulating dose to that point of asphyxiant gases on the occupants of flat 201 would be sufficient that they would be in danger of collapse in the lobby and the stair, or the stair, but due to further accumulation in the lobby and the stair?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, and that's paragraph 56. Now, where you've estimated those times, have you taken into account any physical characteristics of the occupants?
No, you could regard that as for sort of an average adult occupant.
Right. So if somebody had mobility difficulties, what adjustment would one make to those numbers, those times?
Well, we discussed this a little bit yesterday. It would depend a bit on the form of disability and the conditions in the stair at the time they descended. But if it was a period when the stair was relatively clear of smoke, then you might expect a significant difference in the descent rate for somebody with a physical disability compared to a more able-bodied person. So they would have been longer in the stair column. So once the stair column starts to fill with smoke, you might expect them to have a somewhat longer exposure. Mm-hmm. We should remember, of course, that in the building codes, the stair is regarded conceptually as a temporary safe refuge. And a lot of the means of escape requirements in the building codes are designed to ensure that you get people into that stair. Once they're in the stair, they're regarded as in a sort of temporary safe place. Of course, but that didn't really work out very well at Grenfell.
No. And then if you look at paragraph 56 at the top of the screen, you say in the last sentence, the longer they waited in flat 201 before leaving, the earlier the summed dose in the lobby or stair. Is it right that the longer the occupants remained in the flat, the greater the danger of those occupants accumulating the total summed dose of a
Yes, that's right. So we're looking at the total dose, and you're building it up all the way through. So if you have a lot before you start, then once you get out, you're not going to go very far. If you leave before you've accumulated a significant dose, then you're going to be able to travel much further through whatever other conditions you meet.
Yes. And if we go back to pages 10 and 11 in this part of the report, and we can just pick these points out from the paragraphs. Paragraph 23, I think you make the point that the time when Amal Ahmadin and Amaya Tuku Ahmadin left 201 is unknown, but after Fadumo Ahmed, but before about 212, when the accumulated exposure in flat 201 was estimated to reach a dose level predicted to cause collapse for all flat 201 occupants. So does that tell us that Fadumo Ahmed was successful in evacuating the tower because she left earlier, but Amal Ahmadin and Amaya Tuku Ahmadin were unsuccessful because they tried to leave later?
Essentially, yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then accumulated a dose close to causing collapse by the time they'd left the flat.
I mean, as we say, we don't know precisely when they left, but it was a bit later on after Fadumo left, and we know the conditions were deteriorating quite seriously around that time.
Yes.
So they would have acquired a significant dose in the flat.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and just so that people can see this on the page, if we turn please to page 10, paragraph 26, you say there, the longer Amal Ahmadin and Amaya Tuku Ahmadin remained in flat 201, the greater the dose they inhaled, so that leaving any time after about 2 o'clock, they would have accumulated a significant proportion of an incapacitating dose. And then at 29, you say that if they'd left a few minutes earlier, for example, soon after Fadumo Ahmed, then the accumulated dose of asphyxiants from flat 201 would have been lower, enabling them to cross the lobby within a few seconds with a minimal intake of lobby smoke and enter the stair as did Fadumo Ahmed. Now, you've also explained that occupants would not have been aware that they were inhaling asphyxiant gases until they'd reached close to the incapacitating dose. You told us that yesterday.
Yes, they're aware that, of course, they could see the smoke component, but they wouldn't be aware of the actual asphyxiant gases they were inhaling.
No. So the longer they remained in the flat, but in this state of ignorance about what they were taking up, the greater the risk of collapse on evacuation.
Yes, precisely.
Just one or two further clarificatory points about this flat. If we go, please, to page 15 in this part of your report. There are two figures 27 and 28. If we can have those blown up a little, please. If you look at figure 28, this is calculated fractional effective dose and percentage carboxyhemoglobin history for flat 201 occupants. Now, it's a complex chart, but am I right that it shows the lethal threshold for carbon monoxide reached at 223?
Yes,
and
approximately.
About 223, yeah. And is it right that the occupants of flat 201 would have reached the lethal dose threshold of about 50% there?
Yes.
Carboxyhemoglobin concentration by about 223?
Yes.
Would you estimate that the time of death of the occupants would be some time after about 223, therefore?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, would you estimate that the time of death of the occupants would be some time after about 223?
Yes, yes.
Yes, and are you able to give a specific window of time?
Right. We can give an approximate one, but as I explained yesterday, there are lots of uncertainties about the gradual slow decline once you become unconscious, and it depends on the data we have available. So for this particular case, I'm right in saying that we don't have any carboxyhemoglobin blood samples from these decedents. So we don't know whether they died at around 50% CHB or whether they went up to 90%. So it would have to be somewhere in that window. What we do know is that, sorry, I'm thinking as I'm speaking, if that's all right. We do know that Jessica Urbano and Deborah Lamprell were on these very long 999 calls, and they became unresponsive and comatose at as you see there, 218 and 221. So that's just before they become completely unconscious. And then shortly after that, I've estimated that they've passed the lethal threshold dose, as we just discussed, at around 223. Now, this depends to some extent on the assumed extrapolation of the fire conditions. So if the carbon monoxide concentration curve due to the fire that's come round to the bedroom is increasing very steeply at that time, which I believe it probably was, then they're inhaling an increasing concentration, so the dose inhaled increases quite rapidly. Against that, of course, their breathing is slowing down as they become deeper and deeper in a comatose state. It's a very uncertain number I've got to give you, but I would think we're talking about somewhere around about 20 minutes or so.
Right. Now, if we go then on the basis of that to the overview table at page 6, which we saw a little bit earlier this morning, you've recorded the time of death for the occupants of flat 201 as about 2:45 in the case of Raymond Bernard, Hamid Khani, Berkey Haftom, Birak Haftom, Jessica Urbano Ramirez, and Amna Idris. But 2:44 for Debbie Lamprell.
May I? I think that's a typographical error.
Right.
I wouldn't make that clear, that finer distinction. So the figure I've put there, which is very, very approximate, I've said approximately 2:45.
And how do you arrive at the 2:45?
Well, by the method I've just said, really, but it's very, very approximate.
And would the time be different for the children in that list?
Well, of course, we know that Jessica Abano, that child became unresponsive at very similar time to the adult who was nearby from the 999 calls. So there wasn't a huge discrepancy between those two in their time to loss of consciousness. So it seems reasonable that there may not have been that much distinction in terms of time to death. But I would say that if anything, the probability is that a child would succumb first. The other child who was present, who was a very young child, I believe, certainly would have been expected to have been overcome at a much lower, earlier time than her mother.
Yes, thank you.
Does that...
Yes, that's helpful. I'd like to turn next to flat 181 on floor 21, please. And this is the death of Ligaya Moore.
Oh, yes.
Now, if we go, please, to page 64, this is where you cover this occupant. And you start by describing the overview of the occupants and the conditions in the flat. And just to run through the chronology which you've set out at paragraph 314, I can do this just with you with me, as it were. She was alone in her flat, in her bedroom throughout. The exterior fire would have started to come into the flat living room from about 1:32, which was about the same time as reported by you and indeed others for flat 201. Yes?
Yes.
And at 1:36, serious smoke and exterior flame spread could be seen near the living room window, with a similar pattern of fire spread to that observed on floor 23. And I think you say that meant that the flat was likely to have filled with smoke, mainly from the exterior and window structures, from about 1:32 to about 1:52.
Yes.
Yes. And from about 1:52, the exterior fire spread to the outside of the kitchen and the bedroom, so that the smoke and the flames began to enter the bedroom.
Yes.
So that's the 1:52 time mark. And then at paragraph 315 over on page 65, if we just nip to that, you note that no pathological or toxicological investigations could be carried out, and her remains were recovered from the bedroom area. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if you look, please, at paragraphs 316 to 319, under the heading Analysis of Uptake of Asphyxiant Gases. It's long. I'm not going to read it all out to you. If you just remind yourself of what you've said there, take a moment to do that.
Yes.
Now, having done that, I should just tell you this, that the inquiry has some evidence that Ligaya Moore was a hoarder and that she had mobility difficulties as well. Would the fact that there was in her flat perhaps a disproportionately large amount of material of different kinds of chemical contents affect the rate of fire and smoke spread within the flat?
Yes, I was aware of her history. I think one of the points I think I've made here is that comparing it to flat 201, for which we have much more evidence, a big difference is, of course, that there was a lot of people in flat 201 who were very aware of what was happening and really quite active. Now, I obviously don't know, but we know that in flat 201, for a period of time, they went in and out of the living room trying to extinguish the fire before, for several minutes before giving up and retreating to the bedroom and landing area, hallway area in flat 201. Now, as they did that, they certainly must have shut that door to the living room where the fire was behind. And by doing that, it bought them some time to survive. It reduced the smoke contamination of the rest of the flat where they were sheltering. Now, as I say, nobody, Fadumo Ahmad in a statement does not say that she shut that door, but I find it hard to believe they wouldn't have done so. The thing about Lagia Moore is that we have no idea what activities she was carrying out. If, for example, she slept through the whole thing and was in her bedroom, and the interior doors in her flat were open, then as the fire broke into the living room, and there was a fire in the living room, that would have just spread throughout the open space of the whole flat, in which case she would have been exposed to higher concentrations of smoke from an earlier period than those in flat 201. But we don't know. Now, to pick up on your point, also, if in that living room there was a large load of all sorts of materials, that would present a big fire load, which could have certainly produced a much more intense and smoke-rich fire at that early stage. If, however, of course, she'd closed those rooms off, she would have still had some protection while in her bedroom. So there are a lot of unknowns, really, in respect to her situation, I think.
Okay, really, it comes to this, Professor. Are you able to draw any, if not firm, then reasonably reliable conclusions about the cause of Lagia Moore's death in light of the fact that her flat was, let it be assumed, her bedroom was far fuller than would be normal of material?
Well, if one option is to consider the effects on her to be similar, an exposure to be similar to that for flat 201, in which case we would, with the interior doors shut, she stays in the bedroom until the exterior fire comes outside the bedroom, and you've got penetration of stuff from the exterior fire coming in. In that case, I would be looking at a similar time of about 2:45. If, however, we had these other scenarios developing that we've just discussed, then we can pull back from that to earlier times, depending on how these unknown scenarios might have developed. So we'd have a much wider window. I think I mentioned in here that she'd been in her room for roughly an hour from when the fire first appeared outside her flat living room. If her interior doors were open and you got a significant fire growing quickly in that living room, then she could have been overcome within minutes of that occurring. So that would put it at 140, 150, something like that.
Right.
As the earliest. There's quite a wide range of uncertainty.
I see. And on a slightly different topic, have you taken into account, and if not, would you take into account the fact, first that she had mobility difficulties, and second that the presence of this disproportionate amount of material in her flat might have impeded her escape? Should you?
I haven't considered those, but obviously they might have done. We've no idea what she considered doing on the night, do we?
Right. And when you say might have done, are you able to fix some sort of...
Oh, well, let me...
probability?
She had if you're telling me that she had physical walking mobility issues, then there are two consequences that might lead to. One is that she may have felt an early stage when conditions were, if she'd become aware of the fire at an early time, say before 1:30, and considered evacuating, she may have been inhibited from doing so, knowing that she would have difficulty negotiating the stairs, as other people in the tower who were disabled, had mobility issues, did. So that's one possibility. Another is, if she had attempted to do so, then obviously she may have, her movement may have been somewhat slower, as we've discussed.
Now, if we go please to paragraph 319 in the last sentence, you say at the foot of the screen, if Lagia Moore had been in her bed, where most of her remains were found throughout the incident, it is possible that she may have been overcome and died from smoke inhalation while asleep that night. One of the documents that the inquiry has seen is that the archaeology report records that it was possible that her body was recovered in the bedroom area, but may have been located in the vicinity of the bedroom entrance and hallway. Did you, when you were doing your work, consider the possibility that she may not have been in bed, but may have been somewhere else in her flat?
I'd have to... I obviously read the Electo report that you're referring to, I haven't got the details in front of me, but I thought their main contention was that she was amongst the bed springs, her remains were amongst the bed springs. If the extent that was the case, that means she was basically associated with the bed and possibly in it or on it. And that's the line I've taken here. If you're now telling me that there's some doubt, obviously they faced a great difficulty exactly saying where some of the remains were, and particularly because of disturbances to the site, and I know there were lots of issues. But if we think of a scenario where her remains were found more in, so you're saying in the bedroom doorway area?
In the vicinity of the bedroom entrance.
Yes, well that would, if so, that would obviously imply that she may have got up and tried to move around the flat at some point and been aware of her situation.
Yes, and would that affect your conclusion?
Yes, so well, it wouldn't necessarily change the timing, but it would mean that she wasn't asleep when she realised that the situation was becoming very serious.
Yes. And if we go to page 66 under the heading Conclusions, paragraph 321, there you say that since the flat 201 occupants are known to have been overcome by asphyxiant smoke and became unresponsive at about 2:18 to 2:21, it is likely that the effects on Ligaya Moore in flat 181 were similar, and since her remains were recovered from the bed, she may have been overcome in her sleep, or if awake, may have sheltered in her bedroom.
Yes.
And it goes on. So do you estimate that her time of death should be similar to that of flat 201? I think you've
with that scenario, I think so.
Yes, with that scenario.
But as we said, there could be other interpretations.
Right. And if we then turn to the next flat I want to ask you about, this is floor 23, flat 202. I've gone back to floor 23 because I wanted to associate Ligaya Moore's flat with 201.
Yes, I
We
understand.
go back to floor 23. This is now flat 202, Gloria Trevisan and Marco Gottardi. And also Marjorie Vital and Ernie Vital, who were also recovered from flat 202 on floor 23. Now, can we go, please, to pages 17 to 20 in this report, starting at 17? You've given an overview there of the occupants, and the four there are named. And you say in the last sentence of paragraph 59, they were part of the group who ascended from the lower floors at around 1:30.
Those two were, yes.
Those two were, yes,
Yeah.
Marjorie Vital and Ernie Vital.
Yes.
Yes. And then at 61, you refer to the conditions in flat 202, and there's some detail about that, which runs down to paragraph 70 on page 20. And what I just wanted to do was to pick out the main time marks with you and see if you just agree with those so that people watching this can understand it. First, is it right that at about 1:30, Marjorie Vital and Ernie Vital moved up to floor 23 and joined Marco Gottardi and Gloria Trevisan in flat 202?
Yes.
And then at about 1:34, Gloria Trevisan reported to her mother that they could not leave because the lobby was filled with smoke.
Yes.
And then between about 2:45 to 03:08, Gloria Trevisan had her last call with her parents. That's paragraph 62 on page 18.
Yeah.
Yes?
Well, I can't see it. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Should be then.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And then at 63, you've set out your analysis of the fire spread and some bullet points there. 201 to 210, you've got spread across the east face kitchen and living room to the corner column 5, then continuing. 233 to 235, spread around D5 to south face of living room and then across living room to column D4, between living room and bedrooms up to 251, and then 251 to 255, spread across bedrooms to column D3, between flats 202 and 203. So that's the analysis. And then at paragraph 70, if we can go to that, please, on page 19, you say this. In summary, from 1:30, there would have been slow smoke infiltration from the lobby. Then into the east side kitchen and living room from 202, Gloria Trevisan reported dense smoke coming into the flat through the living room windows at 2:13 during a telephone call to her mother. She reported the fire coming into the window sometime after her call to her mother began at 2:45. And then you say that carboxyhemoglobin blood concentration levels for Gloria Trevisan measured 78%, and Marco Gottardi's tests showed the presence of carboxyhemoglobin, but tests couldn't be carried out for Marjorie and Ernie Vital. Yes. Yes. So that's the background. Now, can we go back, please, to page 17, paragraph 60? You say, I've reviewed witness evidence and the results from toxicology and pathology reports which have led me to conclude that all 4 occupants of flat 202 were overcome by asphyxiant gases which incapacitated them before the fire affected them. And now, could you just explain your finding that they were overcome by asphyxiant gases which incapacitated them before the fire affected them? When you say the fire affected them, what did you mean there?
Can we just swing to the paragraph where I noted where their remains were found, because that's relevant. I think we had two in the bathroom and 2 in the hallway or something.
Yes, I think you probably need paragraph 65 for that on page 18. Page 18. Or paragraph 71 on page 19, which is probably the better paragraph.
Yes, it was flashed up earlier, then we moved away.
Yes, it's gone away. It's paragraph 71 on page 19.
Yes, I've got it. The charred remains of the 4 occupants are recovered from the hallway and bathroom area. So they'd taken refuge in that area. Thank you. Sorry, now can we go back to your
my question was
in that previous paragraph you were showing?
Yes, let's go back to that. That's paragraph 60 on page 17. And you say in the last few words there, before the fire affected them. Well, can you just clarify what you mean?
I mean, I have to say that from the table that I prepared last week for this to summarise what's happening in these flats too. These flats too were particularly dangerous in a way, compared to some of the other flats. And of course, the situation with flats too are that the fire is coming from flat 1 over column C, and it first, as we've just been discussing, comes to the kitchen, comes past the kitchen, affects the kitchen, and then the east face of the living room. And when the fire comes into the kitchen, and I've noticed in a number of these flats, we seem to get smoke coming from there into the hallway with some ease. I'm not sure, something to do with the way people leave their doors or something in there. So we often have a situation where the kitchen and the hallway of the flat become quite badly smoke-logged first. And then, of course, the living room becomes very badly involved once the fire, not long afterwards, moves on the east face, moves to the living room. But the occupants, and this has happened in a number of these flats, tend to withdraw to the bedrooms, bedroom 1 or bedroom 2, which face out to the south side of the tower, and therefore away from the fire, where they can open windows and shelter quite well for quite a long period, while the conditions are deteriorating in other parts of the flat, if they shut the bedroom doors and this sort of thing. Now, in this particular case, we're fortunate that we do have one pretty good blood toxicology result of 74, and you recall I'm saying that that's actually is. If you remember Professor Nelson's distribution, that was round about the mode. It was the most common sort of finding for somebody who died from smoke inhalation of high carbon monoxide in a fire. So it's well above the threshold for lethality.
Can I just pause there?
Yes.
You say 74, I think it was 78 in fact.
I beg your pardon, not even more so. Yes.
It's paragraph 70.
So that is the result for a person who has been overcome by carbon monoxide and toxic smoke, and then become comatose and continue to inhale smoke while comatose containing carbon monoxide for some time until their systems pack up and they die. So it's a very strong signal to me that we're dealing here with smoke cases. to the extent that they were in that part of the flat, it's one of the areas last affected by fire breaking into the envelope of the building, although to the extent they were in the hallway, it's still quite vulnerable to smoke build-up from quite an early stage when the fire gets past the kitchen. If to the extent that they may have been at some time sheltering in the bedrooms, then that could have delayed their uptake.
I see.
And this happened in some of the other flats too, further down the tower.
Yes. Now, you set out at paragraph 74 to 79 on pages 19 to 20 of this section, your conclusions here. If we could just pick those up and just read those to yourself, please. Foot of 19 and then over to page 20. If we turn to page 20 now, please. If you just read the rest of that down to 79.
So to flag this as we go through it, so we've got a last call from Marco Gottardi at 3:15,
Yes.
which was 75 minutes after the arrival of the exterior fire outside the kitchen. So it's a long time that they were in there breathing this smoke.
Yes.
They could not have survived this long. It helps me to read it out, sorry. They could not have survived this long if they'd remained in the living room, as I've just been explaining. But because this is a two-bedroom flat, they could have sheltered for some time in the south-facing bedrooms or in the landing bathroom area until after the fire penetrated the south bedrooms, after it spread across the bedrooms between 0251 and 0255. After this, conditions are likely to have become unsurvivable within minutes due to the asphyxiant gases, mainly carbon monoxide and smoke. The long period of survival...
Professor, you don't need to read it aloud.
Yes, I was trying to...
You don't need to read it aloud, but I just wanted you to read that to yourself, because I have one or two questions on this.
I'll carry on, please.
Yeah, carry on to the end of 79, if you,
All right, well,
if you would.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, in your document that we saw earlier, you provided an estimated endpoint for possible evacuation from flat 202 as 2:45, and in fact we see that at paragraph 78. Yes, about 2:45.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that a successful escape from flat 202 after about 2:45 was possible but unlikely?
Yes. Well, up to then, it would have been a good chance of being able to come out and walk down. After that, you're getting into the preloading territory where you're more likely to have collapsed as you try to walk down.
Right. Now, at paragraph 74, as we've seen and you've read out, I think, you say that the occupants of flat 202 would not have survived long after Marco Gottardi's last call to his father at 3:15.
Yes.
Yes. Then if we go to page 6 of this part of your report, table 20, you provided a window of time there, looking at flat 202, at the foot of the screen on the right. You provided a window of time as about 3:15 to 3:30. Is that your estimated window, a band for time of death? Is that the window for time of death?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, yes.
Right, I see.
Very approximate.
I see. And why do you say 15 minutes or so after about 3:15?
Well, because 3:15, what did we say happened at 3:15? Was that the end of the call?
That was the last call that Mark...
Yeah, so round about that time, we're looking at incapacitation, then adding on time for build up after that to the final dose of death.
And how do you get to 3:30 as the outside time? About
it's really a very crude estimate, just allowing some time for this extra deterioration to have taken place.
Yes, I see. Now, for Marco Gottardi, his post-mortem report contained the finding that a secondary cause of death after inhalation of products of combustion was a single vessel coronary artery atheroma. Can you tell us what effect,
Okay,
if any, that pathological finding would have had on his death?
Is that for my report?
It is.
Yes.
No, it is not.
It's not. Okay.
It's from his.
Just remind. Sorry, it's hard to keep all this material in your mind.
Yes.
Did we have his carboxyhemoglobin at death?
No, we don't.
Oh, we don't. Okay. So we had one, which was another person.
We had Gloria Trevisan's at 78%.
That's right. Sorry, I'm going to have to write this down. So Gloria was at 78. So
Gloria's 78.
as far
Marco
as we know,
Gottardi-
she was otherwise reasonably healthy.
Yes, Marco Gottardi, I misled you slightly, Professor, I apologise.
Yeah.
Marco Gottardi's test showed the presence of carboxyhemoglobin, but not, I think, a precise percentage.
And he had this coronary artery.
Yes, he had a single vessel coronary artery atheroma
Yes.
as a secondary cause of
Yes,
death.
okay, I think I'm up to speed.
Right, sorry.
Right, I can't remember whether I noted any of this in my report
No,
at some point.
I
But,
don't think you did, and that's hence the question.
yeah, okay.
The question,
Well, yes, no.
Sorry,
I have a question.
you're going to have to, I'm sorry, you are both going to have to listen to the question or the answer and then respond to it, because at the moment, the transcriber's not getting anything at all, I think.
I beg your pardon.
Not with any ease, so...
Yeah, the question,
Yes.
what effect would, or what if any effect, would the finding or would the fact of a single vessel coronary artery atheroma have had on Marco Gottardi's death?
Yes, so you remember we were discussing yesterday that for cases like this, I found a clear relationship between coronary artery or heart disease and an increased susceptibility shown by death at a lower carboxyhemoglobin than other people. So he would have been at risk of collapse and death at a lower carboxyhemoglobin concentration than, for example, the other person we just discussed.
Gloria Trevisan.
Gloria, yeah. So he might well have died at a lower dose, yeah.
Right, and does
Say
that
50, for example, or even lower.
and does that tell us that he might have died earlier in your 15-minute window?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Right. I next want to turn to a different floor, a different flat, and a different occupant. Anthony Disson, flat 194, on floor 22. Can we please go to page 56 in this part of the report? And here you've set out at paragraph 265 the overview. You say that he was the resident in flat 194 alone on the 14th of June 2017. He remained in the flat until approximately 3:26 to 3:27 when he told the 999 operator that he was on the stairs. His remains were recovered from the stair.
Yes.
Now, then, if you look down below that, you deal with the conditions in flat 194, and you say Anthony Disson was alone in the single-bedroom flat 194, located on the west side of the tower. As such, he was protected from the effects of exterior fire spread for more than 2 hours until fire spread to his flat.
Yes.
And then you set out in the following paragraphs the fact that he was seen by Naomi Lee in the communal lobby at about 1:25, and then a series of calls between paragraphs 268, first one at 1:30, and then over the page to paragraph, if you go over the page please, to paragraph 276, the last call at 3:27:53, a call lasting 45 seconds, where he spoke to the Kent Fire and Rescue Service, and that's when he told them that he was on the stairs.
Yes.
And at 277, if we look at that, you give us the bullet points for the exterior fire spread and the various time marks there. Exterior images showing fire outside flat 195, that's the one next door, at 3:01. Earliest signs of flames crossing B1 to the outside of flat 194, bedroom at 322, from 322, fully outside the bedroom at 326, but not fully outside the living room until 3:55.
Yes.
And those are all taken from the photographs and the Met evidence. And then at paragraph 279, under the heading Evidence from Toxicology and Pathology Reports, you say he had a very high blood percentage of carboxyhemoglobin level of 71%, consistent with death from inhalation of asphyxiant gases, with carbon monoxide inhalation as the main cause of death. And if we go, please, to page 57, paragraph 280, you say this: there was smoke infiltration from the lobby from about 1:30, increasing significantly by 1:50, when he said that all smoke was coming in and that he could not see. And then from about 2 o'clock, when Anthony Disson reported that it was black in the flat, and he quotes, he cannot see anything, close quotes. From these accounts, there was sufficient smoke entering from the lobby during this period to significantly lower visibility in the flat, and therefore also some asphyxiant gases. Now, can you explain your analysis of Anthony Disson's exposure to toxic gases? And I want just to show you figures 39 and 40 on page 59, the next page, please. If you look at those two, you've given us calculated smoke and asphyxiant gas exposure history for Anthony Disson, and then figure 40 is calculated fractional effective dose and percentage carboxyhemoglobin history for Anthony Disson. Looking at those, are you able to just take us through those and explain your analysis?
Yes. I think it might be helpful also if we were to look at the floor plan chart briefly.
Let's do that. MET 30 is 12593 then. Should we have that at the same time?
Yes, if we can, that would be good.
That's MET 30 is 12593. Page 7. We'll try page 7 first. And if we could just have that slightly enlarged.
Yes, that's adequate. Yeah. So you remember I was saying yesterday that for a majority of people that I'd examined, if they left their flat where they were sheltering before or soon after the arrival of the exterior fire outside one of the rooms in their flat, and they were sheltering at that time in a different location, they really had a pretty good chance of having acquired a low dose while in the flat, and if they crossed the lobby efficiently, of making a successful descent of the stair. So when we look at the timings for Anthony Disson, he did in fact evacuate his flat, and we have quite good data now from the 999 call in the stair. He left his flat very close to the time that the exterior fire first spread outside his flat. So if we look at the diagram of his flat, I just wanted to point out some of these features. So obviously the fire is coming from across the west side of the tower, from the north corner. It's spread past the west face of flat 5, and it's just coming past the column there.
Column B.
Column B, thank you, to attack the bedroom of Disson's flat. Now, assuming that he was in another part of the flat, which I think we have some evidence for, and that he would have kept his bedroom door closed, we would have expected him to have been able to avoid considerable uptake of gases up to the time he left. But this was obviously not the case, because he collapsed after only descending, I think it was 2.5 floors in the stair, which would only have taken somebody walking down the stair a minute or so, which wasn't long enough to accumulate a huge dose while in the stair up to that point. So I spent quite a lot of time trying to understand his particular case, because it puzzled me somewhat. Now, of course, one of the features of a flat 4 is that it's a smaller area, floor area. It's a smaller flat. And of course, the front door is the same as any other flat. So to the extent that you've got smoke leaking in through the front door from the very high concentrations in the lobby that we discussed yesterday, it would be prone to a more rapid build-up from the lobby penetration smoke than a two-bedroom flat would, purely on basis of its volume, smaller volume. Also, of course, because it's in the middle of the side of the tower, and depending on what smoke and other conditions might be flowing past on the outside, you haven't got the option that you have for a two-bedroom flat of opening windows on another side of the tower away from the smoke. So you have less ability to avoid exposure to smoke while in the flat. And so I think that may be one factor that he was having. And from his description of the conditions, and he's describing a lot of smoke in his flat, more than you would normally expect to see. He may have had a particularly leaky front door, which allowed a much bigger build-up from the lobby smoke in his flat than others. But I'm seeing a slightly similar pattern in other flats 4. So it seems to be a bit of a flat 4 issue, but certainly in his case. So I've concluded that he, and that shows up in these charts here, that he had a significant exposure to smoke from some source. And the obvious source really is the lobby, more than anything else, during the time he was in his flat. Now, there is, of course, another possibility that we have to take into account, and that is, what did he do as he tried to cross the lobby after he left his flat, but before he managed to enter the stair? And you remember I was saying yesterday, and if we look at the plan here, you can see that the path from his front door, where you see the figure 4 written in the, somebody's written on a figure 4 there, that's his front door. If he comes out of there, he's got to walk out into the centre of the lobby, then past all these chute doors and cupboards that we discussed yesterday, to find his way to the entrance door to the stair. And I mentioned that from the witness accounts of a number of witnesses had difficulty performing that, negotiating that space. We don't know whether that also applied to him, to Anthony Disson, but that may be another opportunity, if you like, for him to have an excess exposure before getting to the stair. But for whatever reason, I feel that because he collapsed after such a short distance in the stair, he had preloaded to a high dose before he got there. And that correlates quite well with the descriptions he gave in these various calls of the bad conditions in his flat. Yes. So I think there's something particularly bad about that flat, the leakage into that flat, possibly from the lobby.
From the lobby? Mainly
from the lobby, with perhaps a little bit from outside, but not really from the exterior fire having spread past his flat because it was too early.
Yes. Now, if we go then to paragraph 295, on page 60, next page, please, you say there that he inhaled a dose level of 50% carboxyhemoglobin, which represents the threshold for the lethal exposure, and he'd done that by 356, and therefore you estimate that he died by approximately 0431. Yes?
Yes. Just remind me of his final dose. He died at 71%.
71%.
Yes. Yeah.
And to confirm, you've estimated that the time of death was 4:31.
Very approximate.
Approximate, yes, 4:31, yes. Following prolonged exposure in the stairs, I think for more than an hour from 3:26.
Yes.
Yes, and we get the 3:26 point higher up the page at paragraph 289. If we can just scroll up to that, please. Is that right?
Right. It's hard to
I've rather taken this backwards, but he has 71% carboxy in his blood. He leaves the flat at approximately 3:26 to 3:57.
Yes. Right. And then I said he died at what time?
At approximately 4:31.
Yes. Yes, because he had to have time to breathe very slowly, breathing 1,800 parts per million in the stair for a prolonged period to have achieved the 74%, where it was 71% at the time of death.
Yes. So just to break that up into parts, at the point he enters the stair, he's obviously still mobile.
So he's somewhere around about approaching the 30% point.
Yeah, he's about the 30% point. So you've got to get up to
From there to 70.
Up to 71% or so.
Yes. And that's going to take quite some time because he's comatose, he's breathing very slowly, and he's not breathing an especially high concentration of carbon monoxide.
Yes, thank you. Now, if we then go, please, to page 41 in this part of your report. Just a final clarificatory point on Anthony Disson. Under 194, you say Anthony Disson to stare.
Oh, yes.
326 to 327. To be clear, that's not the time of death.
Absolutely not.
It's
No, that's the time.
Into the stair.
That's the time he estimated he entered the stair.
And therefore, you could amend this part of Table 21 by adding the time of death.
Yes.
0431.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Let's then turn next to flat 193 on floor 22, the Choucair family. Now, we have a number of time points here, and let me just pick this up with you at page 44, paragraph 207. And in fact, I'll pick it up a little bit higher up under overview of the occupants, and you name them: Nadia Choucair, Bassem Choucair, and their children, Miona Choucair, Fatima Choucair, and Zainab Choucair, present in the flat. They were joined by Syria Choucair, the children's grandmother, and Naomi Lee and Lydia Liao by 1:30. Then you deal with the conditions in flat 193. And just to summarise this, if I can, is it right that, and we pick this up from 207, from 1:30, the lobby was filled with smoke?
Yes.
And that during the next hour, the occupants of flat 193 stayed in the living room, which was relatively free of smoke?
Yes.
And then we know that blood samples could only be taken from 2 individuals, confirming the presence of carboxyhemoglobin, but immeasurable concentrations, I think. Yes?
Right.
Well, we get let's go to paragraph 47 to pin that down. Paragraph 220, please. That is. I've summarised very much so what you've set out in detail there. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the Hashim. This is the family from flat 2 who joined at a later date, wasn't it?
Yes.
We've got some CHB there, was present, but they could not measure. The police toxicology was unable to give a value.
Yes. And you note, I think, at paragraph 221 on the same page, that the flat 193 occupants were located in the southwest corner of the living room, and you say that meant that they were likely to be subjected to heat exposure after the fire reached that side of the building between about 3:37 to 3:38.
Yes.
Yes. And I think you go on to note that due to their prolonged exposure to smoke and asphyxiant gases, it's likely that the occupants of that flat would already have inhaled a significant dose of asphyxiant gases by that time.
Yes.
Yes. And I think you draw an analogy there with Abrafas Ibrahim in flat 203, the flat immediately above it.
Yes. So we have a time for him falling, and we know exactly what his carboxyhemoglobin was at 20% at that time.
We do,
Yeah.
for reasons that you've explained in relation to him in other parts of your report. If we go then, please, to page 52 in this part of the report, we have figure 38. And let's just look at that together. That shows the forward calculated uptake.
Yes, they're very busy.
It's very busy. Am I right that this is the calculated fractional effective dose and carboxyhemoglobin history for the occupants of that flat?
Yes, and the one above.
And the one above. You've got 23rd flat 203 and 22nd 193. Now, does it show that the occupants of both of those flats were likely to be comatose by 4:13?
Yes.
And therefore to have crossed the lethal threshold by 4:17?
Yes.
And I think in your conclusions, which we can find on page 54, let's have those up at the same time, please. Page 54, paragraph 254. Page 54, paragraph 254. Yes. I'll read it aloud. You say, by around 4:17 to 4:20, the occupants are likely to have inhaled a lethal dose of asphyxiant gases. As stated, since the remains of the flat 193 occupants were located in the southwest corner of the living room, it is likely that they would have been subjected to some heat exposure after the fire reached the south side of the living room. However, due to their prolonged exposure to smoke and asphyxiant gases, it is likely that the flat occupants would have become comatose, then died from inhalation of toxic smoke and due to the inhalation of asphyxiant gases, especially carbon monoxide, with contributory effects from other toxic gases, including hydrogen cyanide.
Yes.
Now, you've given a window of 4:17 to 4:20. You say around 4:17 to 4:20. That's an approximation, is it?
It is approximation because at that point in the proceedings, we don't really know what the fire was doing, how rapidly the curves for the actual fire are increasing. So whereas I can make a reasonable estimate of, if you like, the fire, the smoke and toxic gas curves before that, where we have the data for Naomi and Lydia and then for Abraham on the floor above. So that gives me some fixed points to fit my curves to. Beyond that time, other than I think there were one or two phone calls with some accounts of what was going on, that's an extrapolation of the curve which has some uncertainty about it. So we've got some uncertainty about the growth curve of the fire and the conditions after that time. We also have some uncertainty about, for the reasons I've mentioned before, about the blood and the time of death issues. So again, time of actual death is quite hard to pin down.
Now, this may not be a very good example because of the absence of precise carboxyhemoglobin samples, but you say at the end of that paragraph 254, especially carbon monoxide with contributory effects from other toxic gases, including HCN, hydrogen cyanide. Are you able to tell us to what extent, to what material extent, hydrogen cyanide played a part in the deaths?
Well, for all these calculations we discussed yesterday, I've based my analysis on a pretty good estimation of what the carbon monoxide was, because we have all the blood data and these other bits of information. So I can kind of pin down the carbon monoxide. If I know the carbon monoxide, I can try to estimate what the cyanide concentration profile was. And as we discussed yesterday, the way I do that is by the ratio that we discussed between the carbon monoxide and cyanide in these fire gases. And as you'll recall, yesterday I said that from my analysis of the toxicology, fire gas data, the ratios between carbon monoxide, which we now have with some certainty, and the unknown hydrogen cyanide would have been very similar for burning flat contents type materials or from burning exterior cladding and insulation materials at about 26-27 to 1 ratio. So using that ratio and knowing with some certainty what the carbon monoxide concentration was, I can make a fairly good estimation, in my view, of what the cyanide exposure was. And from that estimated exposure, I conclude that the cyanide was there. It was making a contribution, but it wasn't the main driver of what we're seeing in front of us. The main driver is still the carbon monoxide.
Yes, and can you be more precise about what you mean by, or what you're identifying by, contributory effects? What contributory effects?
Yes, we discussed this yesterday, and this is where the science is somewhat uncertain. But we know that both of these gases are independently asphyxiant gases, both of which result in some form of tissue hypoxia, which causes collapse in the individual. So either cyanide on its own or carbon monoxide on its own produce similar kind of symptoms and effects in the exposed person. When they're there in the same time, then there are a number of possibilities. So one possibility is that they act completely independently, in which case whatever the outcome is just dependent on whichever gets there first, if you like, the one that's driving. The other is that there's some kind of toxicological additivity, some degree of additivity. It doesn't have to be 1 + 1, it may be some other fraction, but there's some interaction and additivity between the two, and we discussed this yesterday. And there is some evidence that may be the case, and the default assumption, if you like, that all the toxicologists make in our committees and standards, and to err on the side of caution, is to assume that the fractional doses of these two gases are directly additive. But that's not something we know with certainty. And there's a lot of complexity about this. One of the, as I said yesterday, the main effect of carbon monoxide is to inhibit the delivery of oxygen to the tissues. The main effect of cyanide is to inhibit the use of oxygen by the tissues. But there's a complexity in that the point of action of cyanide is in the mitochondria of the cell. It affects oxidative metabolism, in fact, blocks it in the cytochrome chain. And it has been shown in recent years that carbon monoxide, in addition to the effects on the blood that we've been discussing yesterday, also directly affects the mitochondria. So you can see there possible ways of interaction and metabolic additivity between those two gases. So there is some uncertainty about this. I feel that the uncertainty about all these kind of outcomes is such that the presence of the smaller fraction of cyanide in these cases means that although it numerically, if you like, provides us with about a third in some of these cases of a incapacitating dose, when you've got one. If we have a dose, it should be on the screen somewhere. The FED at collapse.
If we go back to page 52, that should show you figure 38.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit too involved here. What I'm saying is that we had something like a third of a dose to cause incapacitation of cyanide. We have a whole dose, a dose of 1 for carbon monoxide. If you add them together, you get 1.3, right? So you could argue that we would have expected them to collapse at a carboxyhemoglobin somewhat less than, in this case, because they're in a flat 40%, because of the added effect of the cyanide. But I would say we're trying to make too fine a distinction here. And effectively, yes, I think the cyanide would have made some contribution. The dominant toxic gas here causing incapacitation is the carbon monoxide. And I think that's about as far as I can really go with it.
So is that a way of telling us that you can't quantify the contributory effects from hydrogen cyanide? Well,
I can say that it's relatively small in this case. So, but I can't say with absolute certainty that the combination of these two gases would shift the time to incapacitation significantly in one direction.
No, but if one comes away from the standard of absolute certainty and perhaps uses instead a standard of reasonable confidence, would your answer be the same?
My answer would be that both are making some contribution, but the dominant gas because of the ratios present in these cases here in Grenfell is carbon monoxide. So the carbon monoxide is dominating the incapacitation. It's certainly dominating the death, the point of death. But that I think we need to leave some room for cyanide making some contribution to this incapacitation, partly by increasing breathing to a small amount, as we discussed yesterday. So I wouldn't want to exclude it from having a contribution here, but I think it's relatively small.
And just one more go, if you like, on this. If you look at paragraph 254 and your estimated time period for the lethal dose being inhaled, 417 to 420, would that still be the same estimated time frame in the absence of HCN?
Yes, I wouldn't be able to change that significantly, no.
Right, thank you. Now, moving away slightly from that particular point, there is I'll read the reference in the record, I don't need to show it to you. There's a transcript of a call from Nadia Choucair that you've referred to 999, which connects to British Telecom at 3:14,
Yes.
in which Nadia Choucair says, "My daughter's unconscious, she's dying." And the reference for that is COR 401081. Now, the question is, taking that into account, 3:14, is it possible that the child's time of death may have been earlier than the range 4:17 to 4:20?
Yes, no, I hadn't been aware of this particular call up till recently. I was in your report, I believe. I've missed that, I'm sorry. But that seems quite early to me, because we knew Lydia and Naomi had successfully left the flat at 3:10. They'd been, of course, they're adults. And, of course, the other factor, which you may be about to raise with the Choucair family, is that they had attempted previously to escape. I'm right, aren't I, in saying that? Yes? Yes?
Some had, yes.
Yes. So they'd left the flat earlier on, and they were gone for about 8 minutes. And so I estimate that in that 8 minutes they may have travelled down the stair several floor levels and then turned round and come back again. And then they re-entered the flat. So they would have been exposed to the conditions in the stair during that period.
Yeah.
And their uptake of, I have mentioned this to some extent here, that their uptake of carbon monoxide would have been somewhat greater than for example, Naomi and Lydia, who'd remained in the flat throughout. Now, my estimates of times to death are mainly based on the Choucairs and the Hashims who remained in the flat after that. So it's all a little bit difficult. But thinking particularly about this child, the child would have obviously... do we know what age the child was?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure I'm going to...
Well, I mean, what I'm about to say is if the child was carried or walking would make a difference during the time they were trying to move up and down the stair. If it's a small child who was being carried, or if it was a child who was walking.
I mean, if you just tell us what your opinion is,
I think
on the basis of the
from memory, I think she's quite a young child. So as I said yesterday, the rate of uptake of asphyxiant gases in a young child is quite a bit noticeably more rapid than an adult.
Yes.
So on that basis, and partly because of this history of what they'd been doing, it is certainly possible that Zainab could have been overcome and become unconscious some considerable time before the adults were. Yes.
Yes. I mean,
sorry to put it.
But no,
to give you a short answer.
That's helpful. Thank you. Let's then pick up page 53, paragraph 249, where you say there that the... It's not on the screen. If we can just have that on the screen. Yes, thank you. That there would have been limited exposure to and uptake of smoke and asphyxiant gases up to the time they left the flat at 2:44. Then
Yes.
some exposure in the lobby and stair during the approximate 8-minute period before they returned to flat 193.
Yes.
From their 999 calls, they were lucid and physically able when they returned to flat 193.
Yeah, so they were, at that time, the adults were still in a good
Yeah.
condition, but of course they had accumulated a certain preloaded dose in that activity
Yes,
period.
and you go on to say they seem lucid and physically able on their return, and their main exposure is likely to have occurred in flat 193
Yes,
itself.
I think that's the point. Yeah.
After 311.
Yes.
Yes, and you say that at 249, as I've just shown you in the rest of that paragraph. Now, my question, Professor, is would their time in the lobby have contributed to the accumulation of the fractional effective dose of carboxyhemoglobin?
Well, this is an interesting point. So we're talking about flat 203 here, aren't we? A flat 3.
Yes, the flat 3.
So I would not expect them to have spent very long in the lobby because of the distance, again, looking at our diagram, The distance, don't worry, it's all right. The distance from the front door to flat 3 to the stair door is quite short. I think it was actually 6 metres.
But let's have it up so that people can see what you're explaining. MET 30125593, please, page 7.
Okay, yeah, so somebody's written number 3. See where written with a circle number 3.
Yes, that's
the front door of flat 3.
Yes.
And then just to the right of that, up a little bit, we can see the curve of the door to the stair, leading to the stair, and it's a very short distance to travel. So I would have expected them to have spent seconds negotiating that distance, and therefore, and possibly holding their breath while they did it, because we know that the conditions are bad in that lobby. So I would not have expected them to inhale a significant dose while crossing that lobby. However, in the stair, we don't know, but my understanding, I'd have to reread their witness statements again, but I certainly formed the impression that they must have got into the stair, and from the 8 minutes, that would have given them time to have descended quite a number of floors, turned round and reascended in the stair, and had quite a significant exposure while in the stair. So I think that's where their main exposure would have been, in the stair.
Mm-hmm. And would that explain, well, first, does that indicate that the times of death for the Chuko family have been earlier than estimated because of accumulated doses of asphyxiant gases taken up in the stair?
Yeah, I mean, it is possible that we could shift that time back a little bit. Obviously, as I've said, from the calls and things they later made from flat 203, if I've got it right, their main exposure was during this rapid rise period after Lydia and Naomi had left, when the conditions were deteriorating quite rapidly in that flat. And of course, we have the corresponding conditions in the other flat on the 23rd floor for comparison. So that's the basis on which I did my analysis, but I hadn't factored in a specifically added dose for the time they spent in the stair. So if we want to factor that in, and there are all other unknowns about exactly where they're sheltering and things like that, we could shift their time of incapacitation back a little bit, but it has to fit in still with their phone calls, of course.
Yeah. And does that explain why at 3:14 Nadia was telling the LFB call handler that Zainab was unconscious?
It could well do, yes.
Yes, I see.
Yes.
Now, in the same paragraph 249, if we can go back to that, please, at page 53, you refer to the exposure of the Jamal Kadir Hashim family, I call them that compendiously, while in flat 192,
yes,
before they moved to flat 193. And you say that their main exposure came from after they moved into flat 193. Now, if we go, please, to page 43 and look at paragraph 202, and over the page to page 44, paragraph 204, it runs down that part of the page, and over the page, under the heading Analysis of Uptake of Asphyxiant Gases, and I'm summarising what you find here, you identify the conditions in the bedroom in which the Kadir family were sheltering in flat 192 deteriorated more rapidly from around 242. You say that in 202 in the middle of the paragraph.
Yes.
And that the conditions would have deteriorated further at around 255 in the next sentence, yes?
Yeah.
And that the final roughly 15-minute period in the flat is likely resulting in them inhaling a significant dose of asphyxiants before moving to flat 193. Yes?
I just... Where was that?
Well, you find that, I think, in paragraph 202 and 203. It's a combination of the both, I think.
It's hard to digest text quickly, I'm sorry.
I know, and take your time.
Conditions deteriorated more rapidly from 242.
I think the best place to find this, to be frank, Professor, is at the top of page 44 in paragraph 204, where you say, although the flat 192 occupants are able to evacuate the flat at about 256 to 259 and cross to flat 193, they are likely to have inhaled a significant dose of asphyxiants before leaving flat 192.
Right, yes, sorry. So as I was saying half an hour ago, there's a real issue here with these flats too. People were able to minimise their exposure for quite some time by sheltering in the bedrooms, as appears to have happened here. But it looks as if they were still in the flat after there was quite considerable spread of fire, even outside the bedrooms, I think, from what the paragraph we've just been perusing. So they are likely to have, they were still very active, they were able to make the transition without great difficulty, so they were in a good condition at the time they made the transition, but they would have had accumulated some degree of asphyxiance before they left flat 192, possibly more than, if you like, Lydia and Naomi would have been doing in 193 and the two cares before that they did their stair.
Now, you say, in the next sentence, if they had attempted to descend the stair, they would have been in danger of accumulating a sufficient dose to cause collapse in the stair.
Sorry, yes.
To cause collapse in the stair before they could have walked down to the ground floor, especially the children.
Yes.
Are you able to quantify the accumulation of asphyxiant gases and risk of collapse further than you have?
Well, it's similar to what we've been discussing yesterday, that I think from memory, the dose you're going to accumulate as you walk down the stair with 1800 ppm in from a high level is something like 20 or so % carboxyhemoglobin you're going to add to whatever you start with. And if you start with more than about 9 or 10% before you set off from your flat, then you're in danger of getting into trouble before you reach the bottom of the stair. And from the description of the timings of fire spread and the activities of the occupants, I feel they were in the cusp of this kind of transition point where they if they'd remained much longer, they would have pre-accumulated too big a dose to allow headroom for them to have accumulated the further dose as they walked down the stair.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I've got a few more questions to run on this flat and this.
Well, would it be better to have them now?
Yes, I'd rather have them now and then have the break, if I may.
I think that'd be more sensible.
Thank you. Now, we know they went into flat 193 and into clearer conditions than those that existed in the stair, I think. Is there a possibility that whatever they had accumulated in flat 192 might have washed out over the subsequent period that they spent in the clearer conditions in flat 193, bearing in mind the washout curve that you've identified?
Yes, I considered that, and in fact I was thinking about this again recently, and of course the key point here is that we're talking about them being in air, and in fact not even fresh, not even perfect air, because there was some contamination in flat 3. So the washout time, if you remember me saying yesterday, for a half time for air is 4.5 hours. So if you accumulated a dose in flat 192 and then spent, say, 20 minutes or so in flat 193, the decrease, breathing pure air in 193, the decrease of your already accumulated dose would have been quite small during that period of time. So I don't think there would have been, it would have been a little bit, yes, you're right, the process would have been of some clearance during that period before the conditions deteriorated in 193, but I don't think it would have, unless they'd been breathing oxygen, there wouldn't have been a rapid washout.
Right. It really comes to this. Should the residual component of the accumulation from flat 192, which was significant, as you say, and then the washout thereafter in 193 to the extent that there was, as you've explained, be reflected in the likely times of death for the Qadir Jamal Hashim family? So
I think what we would say is that they probably accumulated a significant fraction of their total dose while in 192. That would have decreased very slightly during a few minutes in 193, and then they were all going up together as the conditions in 193 deteriorated then.
Right. So you wouldn't make an, is this right? You would not make an adjustment?
Not really. I mean, this is fine-tuning. There are what-ifs one could play. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference to the outcome.
Now, we know that the Choucair family had 3 children, and the Jamal Qadir Hashim family also had 3 children. Now, if you go to paragraph 253 on page 54 of section 6, 254, page 56.
To which one? Sorry.
If you go, I'm sorry, paragraph 54. So I'm so sorry. Page 54, paragraph 253.
Right.
Sorry, my fault. And you say there in the middle of the paragraph, since the inhaled dose of asphyxiants in infants and young children accumulates at approximately twice the rate of that in adults, it's likely that the children in the Tuqair and Hashim Qadir families would have lost consciousness some time before the adults, closer to 3:53. Since the flat 203 occupants sheltered in the bathroom and toilet, they may have survived a few minutes longer than those in the flat 193 living room.
Yeah, so here we're talking about living room because we're 193, so yes.
Now, could the times of death of the children have been earlier than 4:20? If we go to table 21 and recorded here in para 254, so 4:17 to 4:20, could those times for the children be earlier than that window because of their age?
Yes, I think we can estimate that there would have been a shift. I know it's difficult to quantify, but they would have expected to be earlier than the adults. If you like, the probability is that the children would succumb before the adults, be overcome before the adults.
And I can tell you the age for Zainab, because it's in the phase 1 report and therefore in the public domain, but it was 3 years old.
I thought it was 3, yes. So she was probably carried when they went down the stair, but even so, she's still inhaling significant amounts of these gases. Excuse me.
But just to be clear, you say that it's likely that they would have died earlier than the window of 4:17 to 4:20, but you can't say how much. You can't say how much earlier.
Not really, but yes, earlier, some minutes earlier.
Professor, thank you very much for that. Mr. Chairman, is now a convenient moment for the morning break.
Yes,
Sorry,
it is.
it's a bit later than normal, but
That's all right. It was quite important to get those questions finished on that flat. Thank you. Well, we'll take the morning break now, Professor Purser. We'll come back at 11:45, please.
Thank you.
And as before, please don't talk about your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone.
I understand.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 11:45, please. Thank you. Would you ask Professor Purser to come back in, please? All right, Professor?
Yes.
On we go then. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, I now want to turn, please, to the El Wahhabi family in flat 182 on floor 21. And can we please go first to page 66 in this part of your report? Page 66, DAPR 606. And there we have flat 182 overview. The El Wahhabi family remained in flat 182 throughout the duration of the fire. They were trapped in their flat due to smoke in the lobby. And then you deal with the conditions there. And I'll just set out the relevant facts and just picking them up from paragraphs 3 to 4 and on. After meeting Helen Gebremeskel in the 21st floor lobby, the El Wahhabi family went back into flat 182. Abdulaziz El Wahhabi told Hanan Wahhabi in the second call at 1:30 that they'd not been able to get out because there was too much black smoke. And that comes from the evidence of Hanan Wahhabi. And at 1:38, this is para 326, and I'm going to summarise. At 1:38, they called 999 and described developing conditions during the call, which lasted for an hour. Yes?
Yes.
Just to remind you of that. And then at paragraph 360, if we go to that, please, at page 67, you can see that there's a sequence of events there. In summary, at 2:08 to 2:09, the fire spread to the east side of the living room, which reached the southeast corner by 2:11, and then by 2:38, the exterior fire had spread across the south living room to the bedrooms. Yes?
Yes.
So that's the exterior fire spread. And then if you go, please, to paragraph 366 on page 68, you can see there that it says, from a series of 999 calls made from flat 182 over 7 minutes, from 2:47 to 2:54, it is evident that the conditions in the bedroom were deteriorating considerably in terms of smoke density. The occupants said that they were unable to evacuate. A male caller, there was too much smoke and they could not breathe. They could not see anything. A male caller said that they were going to faint. Once the fire had moved across to the south face of the tower, it would have been more difficult to ventilate from the bedroom windows. The occupants made several attempts to evacuate but were repelled by the dense black smoke in the lobby with zero visibility. Quotes, "We can see nothing." And the last call, this is 367, was at 2:57, ending at 2:58 and 29 seconds. Yes?
Yes.
And the operator said that the caller was a woman on the line, but that it had gone silent. And at 370, at page 69, you say that the toxicology analysis was not possible for any of the family members in that flat. Now,
Right.
that's the background I've shown you.
Yes.
If we next go, please, to page 70 and look at your conclusions, and just remind yourself of them from paragraph 374 to 378, all on the screen in front of you. If you just take a moment to remind yourself of your conclusions there.
Yes.
Are you able to provide a window of time of death or times of death for the El Wahhabi family, which would be after 2:58, the last call?
So, what time did I say they became incapacitated?
I think after 2:45.
Right, so if they became incapacitated about 2:45, and from the previous text, at this time the conditions were deteriorating quite markedly in the bedroom area. So they would have had, so 2:45, they would have had quite a rapid uptake. Then once they became comatose, of course, was a slower period. So I would probably add on, I would start thinking about adding on about 20 minutes to time of actual death as a rough estimate, and I'd try to put a window around that.
Right.
So
Right.
let's say 2:55 to 3:20, something like that, as a window approximate.
I mean, working on the basis of paragraphs 366 and 367, at page 68, if we go back to that, just to try to answer your question a bit better myself from your work, you've taken the 999 calls over the 7 minutes 2:47 to 2:54 and said that the conditions were deteriorating.
Yes.
And the last call was at 2:58. Now, does that first of all, does that help you identify?
Well, what I seek to do is, first of all, identify, as far as I can, the point where they became unconscious. And obviously it was after the end of the call.
Yes.
But we have this note here about the BT operator saying the line had gone silent, which indicates that they may have collapsed around about this time. So that gives us a time of incapacitation to round it up about 3 o'clock, doesn't it?
Yes. Well,
So
you tell me.
Well, yes. I mean, assuming that they went silent because they become unconscious, they're unconscious at 02:58:29. But let's. So we're talking about 3 o'clock essentially.
Yes.
It's right about the time they're becoming unconscious, and then having become unconscious, and we know that the conditions are deteriorating quite markedly at around that time. They continue to inhale these gases until their circulation ceases and they die, and that depends on, as I said before, on the carboxyhemoglobin at death, which we don't know. So we have to put quite a wide window of time on that. But I would. So they're collapsing at about 40% carboxyhemoglobin by definition, if you like, from our previous discussions. So they've got to get up to 50 to cross the lethal threshold. So that would take a few minutes, depending on the exact concentrations that they're exposed to.
And would that be shorter for children than for adults?
So to finish the thought. So if we're talking about something like 3:15, and then if they went up to 90%, then we'd have to add on another 20 minutes or so for that to occur. So these are sort of windows. I'm sorry I can't really give these precise numbers. But for the last question, of course, yes, the children would be overcome before the adults. Right. Certainly in terms of time to incapacitation, quite likely also in terms of time to death subsequent to that.
And is it possible that they could have, on the evidence you've seen, have become incapacitated before 2:58?
The children?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, definitely, yes.
Right. Are you able to estimate the latest time for a successful evacuation for the El-Wahhabi family?
I think I've put something in here about that, haven't I?
Well, I think it might be in your summary note on endpoints. If we can go to that, please, at DAPR 6013, please. 5013. So sorry. DAPR 5013.
Oh, yeah, that would be helpful.
There's the table.
So we're talking about, well, this is for flat 202. So we're talking about flat 2, aren't we?
Yeah, we're talking about flat 182.
Yes, okay. So
a flat 2.
A flat 2,
Yes.
and so the pattern of fire spread and the timing of it at these upper floors was pretty close.
Yeah.
With the slight caveat that as you go down, you sort of buy the odd minute or two floor by floor as you go down.
Yes.
So I've got in a figure there of about 2:45.
Well, that's where I got my 2:45.
Yes, I think that's a good indication. Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's before the 2:58, which was the last time of the call.
Yes. So they're already, because we know that call they're close to unconsciousness. So that's too late by then.
Yes.
Really.
Yes. Thank you. Then let's go, please, to the Belcardi family in flat 175 on floor 20. And for that, please, let's turn to page 88 in part 6 of your report, DAPR 606, please. And the overview at paragraph 486, as you can see, says this: the Belcardi family, Omar Belcardi, Farah Hamdan, and their 3 children lived in flat 175. They were present on the night of the fire. And we can again run through the various facts which pertain to that particular family. Is this floor 21. I think I said 20. It's 21. If you go, please, to paragraph or page 91. It is floor 20.
20.
I'm sorry, it is
20.
It is floor 20. My
Yeah,
fault.
20.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I miscorrected myself. It's floor 20. If we go, please, to page 91. Well, we can pick this up, I think, a bit higher up on page 88, first of all, which we have. And you say in 487 there, the family remained in flat 175 until firefighters attempted to assist their evacuation from the flat at approximately 2:19. Now, working back from that, if we go to page 91, you say on page 91 at paragraph 500 that at 1:30 the occupants in flat 175 reported smoke entering the flat from the lobby in a 999 call, and then you noted that they reported in that call that they closed the windows to prevent smoke entry from outside. That's 501, yes?
Yes.
And just going through this with me.
Yes.
At 502, you say that by keeping the windows closed, rather, flat ventilation was
Yes.
reduced.
Yes.
And then there were 999 calls between 1:43 and 2:08 in which they reported increasing smoke and closed windows. That's 503. Yes?
Now, let me just catch my mind up into this. Increasing smoke and the closed window. Yes, yes,
Yes, 503.
yes.
And they refer to smoke entering if the windows are closed, dense smoke in the hallway, and dense smoke conditions in the flat.
Right.
That's between those two time marks, 1:43 and 2:08. And then if you go to paragraph 504, you say that at 2:11, Farah Hamdan called 999 and reported a lot of smoke coming into the house, and she put sheets under the front door. And then if you go to the bottom of the page, para 506, top of the next page, page 92, there's a call at 2:17, brief call, still alone in flat 175. And then at 5:07, firefighters come to flat 175 just after 2:18. And then if you go on down, please, to paragraph 519 on page 94, we can see the exterior fire spread pattern. And that, in summary, between 2:10 and 2:23, the exterior fire had reached the bedroom of flat 175. And I'm summarising, Professor,
Yes.
as you've said.
This is helpful, yeah.
Yes, just to recall, to remind you. And then if you look at paragraph 520, just below that, under the heading Evidence from Toxicology and Pathology Reports, you say that Omar Belkadi, Farah Hamdan and Lina Belkadi were recovered from the landing between the 20th and the 19th floors there, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And that Belkadi's second daughter had been carried out while the first daughter was found later in the morning.
Yes.
Now, the toxicology results are set out at paragraphs 522 and below. Just to summarise those for you in your own work, Omar Belkadi had 87% carboxyhemoglobin concentration levels. Farah Hamdan, this is paragraph 523, had 85% carboxyhemoglobin. The youngest Belkadi, a baby, had 84% carboxyhemoglobin concentration levels, and that's over the page at page 95, 524. And the eldest daughter of the Belkadis, this is 525, was found in the stairs by firefighters and taken to hospital. And her carboxyhemoglobin saturation levels were measured at 45.3%, which decreased to 24%, as you can see there. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, that's what you set out in relation to that family. I have a number of further questions about that family. If we go, please, to page 89, and just look at paragraph 490. You say there From the evacuation histories of Fadumo Ahmed, Flora Nida, and Farhad Nida, Naomi Lee and Lydia Lau, as I've described, I've determined that the concentration of asphyxiant gases in the stair was moderate, with a carbon monoxide concentration of approximately 1,800 parts per minute, see section 2. At this concentration, I have calculated that a descending adult with no previous exposure would be able to remain walking down the stair for a period of 15 minutes before accumulating an incapacitating dose level of 30% carboxyhemoglobin. Now, I've read you that because we know that from your evidence, I think, repeatedly over the last day and a half. It's good to see that imprint there in this context. If we then go, please, to page 100, and go to paragraph 545, you say there, under your conclusions, that Farah Hamdan, Lina Belkadi, Omar Belkadi, and Malak Belkadi all experienced a similar exposure to toxic smoke and asphyxiant gases sufficient to cause collapse almost as soon as they entered the stair, and then death on the stair after a further exposure. They were not exposed to significant heat while in the flat or lobby. The minor heat damage is likely to have occurred after death, before the bodies were recovered from the stairs. They collapsed almost immediately after entering the stairs, so they had already inhaled an incapacitating dose of asphyxiant gases by this time, approximately 30 to 40% carboxyhemoglobin, while in flat 175 and the 20th lobby. Some of this was accumulated while in flat 175. Now, against that background, can I ask you to look, please, at figures 43 and 44, in which we will find on the next page. Sorry, page 99. Apologies, the previous page. Apologies. There it is, 43 and 44, which is the calculated smoke and asphyxiant gas exposure for flat 175 occupants in 43, and in 44 the calculated FED and percentage carboxyhemoglobin history for those occupants. And we may need to have those expanded a little bit so that they're clear. Now, looking at those figures, I have a question now. Is it possible that the Belkadi/Hamdan family could have successfully evacuated flat 175 if they'd left earlier than 2:17, which is your time?
So they left at 2:19. We established earlier, didn't we?
Yes.
And you're asking me. Sorry, it's hard to keep up with all this. So
Yes.
why do you pick 2:17?
Because that is the last time they called 2:17. And we get that from
Right.
paragraph 506
Oh, okay.
I showed you. We can,
This Belkadi family history is really quite a complex one, as I'm sure you appreciate. We've covered a lot of ground in the last 5 minutes.
I know.
So it might be helpful if I just explain how I approached this. So basically what I'm saying is they evacuated, what time did we say the fire got there?
the exterior fire reached the bedroom of flat 175 at between 2:10 and 2:23.
That's coming to the first bedroom. And we already established that in these flats, as with the Nadar family, even though there may have been a fire outside the bedroom, it was still possible to shelter successfully in other parts of the flat for some extended period. If you remember, the Nadar son and his mother were in that flat 205 for about 20 minutes, or more than 20 minutes, while there was a fire attacking the bedroom, with the bedroom door closed, before they left, and they then made a very successful descent all the way from the 23rd floor. So, and they left, I believe, at 2:23, wasn't it? Something like that. So, in theory, it should have been possible for someone to leave one of these flats around this time and having not accumulated a significant dose while in the flat, and then successfully walk down. And it hasn't happened for the two cares. So why hasn't it happened? And I obviously put quite a lot of effort into trying to understand why their experience was different. I'm sorry I haven't given a simple answer to your question, but I think it's a complicated case. So as we've established from what you were reading earlier, there are some differences between what was going on in flat 175 compared to, for example, flat 205 or some of the other ones in the flat 5 column, because they reported quite a bit of smoke outside, as you said, and they closed all the exterior windows. And whereas in other flats, because you were on a corner location here, people were opening windows on the side away from the fire in order to keep the flats clear. They felt unable to do that, which is why I particularly made a note of that point. And they also had report various degrees of smoke penetration. So point one, I think they had somewhat higher pre-exposure while in their flat before they left it at 219. So instead of notching up maybe 9% carboxyhemoglobin before they set off, as you can see in my estimated analysis here, I'm predicting that they were closer to 20% maybe at the time they left their flat. Then you've got the point that they've got this complex...
Just pause there. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Is that figure 43 and the
figure 44? Yes.
44 and the
Yeah.
and the.
You can see the pink curve, which is the carboxyhemoglobin. You can see the point where where it's a gentle curve going up, and then it suddenly becomes very steep, where the first vertical line is 021830. So up to that point, I feel that they're making that. What's exceptional about this flat? Well, one is this prehistory. There's something going on there, so that's one strike against them. Then, from the description of the activities and the conditions in the lobby by the firefighters, and I illuminated some of this in my report, I feel there was some bit of... the firefighters came to the front door, and they opened the door to the flat and let them in. At that time, they were all quite in a good condition, and they were all preparing themselves to go. They were ready to evacuate. One of them had a baby attached to her back or something, or holding a baby. So they weren't in any state incapacitated at the time they left the flat. They were in a reasonably good condition. However, they had accumulated a sub-incapacitating dose, so there's a strike against them, if you like, before they've entered the lobby. While the front door is open, and the firefighters do emphasise the conditions in the lobby were really bad from a smoke perspective, then obviously smoke's coming in from the lobby. So they're going to, while they're lining up and sorting themselves out, ready to go out with the firefighters, they're accumulating some of this more intense smoke in the hallway of their flat. Then there seems to be a bit of confusion in the lobby. And one of the things that's... this is helpful. I mean, I think we need to go through this detail. One clear point is that the firefighters went down with Omar, isn't it? So he walked down initially across the lobby. Well, he was sort of pulled out of the lobby by one of the firefighters, sort of found him in the lobby, and he was saying, "Oh, I've got to get my family," words to that effect. So there was, I have this mental picture of him being in the lobby for some period of time, concerned about his family behind him and trying to interact with the firefighters coming in to assist him. Quite a complex and difficult situation. And in the complex route, as we mentioned earlier, from a flat 5 location to the front door is all rather complicated. So I can see something going on at that point. Then he goes into the stair, and I think he said he walked down between 2 firefighters and was told to put his hand onto the pack of the one in front and walk down with them. So we know he was in a good condition, reasonably good condition at that point. He was walking. But the key point is he only walks a short distance down, about half a flight or something, before he collapses. And all this is described in some detail by the firefighters. So we know pretty well exactly when this adult male collapsed in the stair from the asphyxiants that he'd inhaled. And he certainly hadn't had time to accumulate any of that to any significant degree while in the stair, ergo he must have got it before he got to the stair. And the two places for him to get it are in the flat before leaving the flat, and I think that is one element. And the other is while in the lobby. And I think, and you can see in my analysis here, I've drawn that little pink curve goes almost vertical at that point where they're in the lobby, because they're exposed to these very, very high concentrations, I believe, of carbon monoxide. So if you spend 2 or 3 minutes in that lobby inhaling that smoke, you're really loading up a big dose. So then the question you're really asking me is, what is the latest time in this particular circumstance that this family might have been able to do it?
Yes.
So if we first of all assume that they were able to make an efficient and rapid transfer of the lobby and not get a dose in the lobby, they would have had to, if we follow my curve back, we want to get to the point where they're at round about 10%. So that's, well, it's hard to calculate, but we're looking somewhere nearer to 2 o'clock. So 2:17 would be too late in this particular flat because of the greater degree of previous contamination in this flat. I think that's my answer to your question. Does that cover it?
2:17 would be too late. But
because this flat was more contaminated than the other equivalent flats.
Yes, but
of that type.
So 2:17 would be too late, but you would say, to answer the question, somewhere nearer 2 a.m.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
But that would still mean, if they got delayed and stayed in that lobby, still would have not made it out. You know, that's predicated on them making a rapid and efficient transfer of the lobby, which I don't think they did. So even if they'd left earlier, if they'd still got caught in the lobby, they could have been in trouble. I mean, it emphasises the possibilities of escape, but also the extreme hazards that are occurring in these locations around this time, right, on many floors. You know. Just
to pick up one point, though, about distances from front doors, and you referred to some difficulty.
Yeah.
If we look at the floor plan, which might help you, Professor.
There are some floor plans with the actual numbers of metres on, but I haven't got one in front of me.
Well, let's look at MET 30125593, which we looked at before, page 7.
Yeah.
We looked at Tony.
Yeah.
We looked at Tony Disson's flat 194, which was a flat 4, and we looked at a flat 3. We're now looking at 175, a 5, and I think you can identify the front door there.
Yes.
Is that more or less? Does that present more or less difficulty?
Yes.
To cross the lobby than Tony Disson's?
Well, it's very similar, as you can see,
yes,
because the 4 and the 5 are quite close together. Yeah. I mean, the absolute distance isn't enormous, but it's a long way to go under these circumstances, and it's the complexity of the route and the danger of getting confused and lost on the way.
Yeah. Now, moving on then, can we get back to your Section 6 report, please? DAPR 606, page 99, paragraph 543. You say there that, in the third line, since Farah Hamdan and Malak Belkadi also collapsed just beyond the flat, this confirms that the 3 adults and both children had acquired doses of inhaled asphyxiant gases, mainly carbon monoxide, capable of causing collapse by these times, 30 to 40%. And then you go on to say, 2/3 of the way down the paragraph, after they are all likely to have become unconscious at 1:32, that must be a mistake.
That's a mistake. I found that yesterday. It should be 2:32, shouldn't it?
Thank you.
Yes.
That corrects that. There would have been a slow, gradual uptake of carbon monoxide on the stair, with a slowly increasing carbon monoxide, carboxyhemoglobin, until they had exceeded the lethal threshold, about 50% carboxyhemoglobin, around 249, based on an estimated average 1800 ppm CO in the stair.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
That is correct. And is that a window of time? Can you give an estimated window of
Well, that's
time?
a point in time. So this is for the time to pass the lethal threshold. So I would probably put that time fairly tightly around there. You know, obviously there's some uncertainty, a few minutes either way, but to get to 50%, well, I don't know, you might add or subtract 3 or 4 minutes either way, either side of that. But that's a good figure to work to, I think, 249.
That's very helpful. Can we then go to table 23, please, on page 85, which shows this family in flat 175. It says there that all the times are to stare at about 2:20.
Yes.
That is, just to be clear, that's the time they enter the stairs, not the time of death.
Yes, yes.
And you would add the time of death, I think,
Yes.
as at 2:49.
Something like that,
That's
yes.
the time at which
Time at which they exceeded the
lethal threshold.
Threshold, yes.
Yes. Right. Thank you. Now let's then turn to another flat on the same floor, flat 173. This is Khadija Say
yes.
and Mary Mendy. Can we please turn first for them to page 101? Flat 173. And you say under the overview of occupants that Mary Mendy and her daughter Khadija Say were both residents of flat 173 and present on the 14th of June 2017. They remained in their flat until sometime after 3:30 when they tried to evacuate. And then you cover the conditions at paragraph 551 and following. And I'll just pick these, again, as I have with the others, pick through these just to pick up the time marks. We start with Khadija Say's posting on Facebook at 1:49 reporting a fire in the block. You say that.
Yes.
And if we go to page 102, please. Paragraph 552, there's an absence of Facebook. And then at 2:27, Khadija Say made a 999 call when she reported a lot of smoke coming in when she opened the door. That's 553. And then at 556, if we go to that, you say, and you record the fact that that Khadija Say and Mary Mendy appear to make 2 unsuccessful attempts to escape.
Yes.
You see that? And the message is at 3:14, and then there's another message and another Facebook message at 3:27. So 3:14 and 3:27 are the recorded mark times for the message recording the attempts. And then at 558, 557, you say at 3:30 she texted the words, "It's in my rooms." This may be a reference to smoke or to the exterior fire which spread outside the flat 173 bedrooms by approximately 3:20 to 3:29. Then you say by 3:37 to 3:53 the south face fire is outside the living room as the west face fire begins to spread outside the kitchen and the west living room. You see that?
So, sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm taking you through 557.
557.
Yes.
Yes.
Just look. Just
Yes.
remind
Okay.
yourself
Yes.
what
I'll
you
just
say there,
give you
so
my. Yeah.
I've read into the record there.
That's right. So by 37 to 53, the fire is outside the living room.
That's the time range
okay.
that you've given yourself there.
Yep.
And then at 558, you say this was the last communication from flat 173. So the occupants must have evacuated the flat sometime after 3:30, and that's a reference to the text in 557 from Khadija Say, where she texts the words, "It's in my rooms." You see that?
Yes.
That's the last communication from her, just after 3:30. And then there's a 999 call from Charlie Craggs at 3:33, who said that Khadija Say and Mary Mendy were still in the flat. The smoke was thick and that they could not breathe and felt as if they were going to faint. That's a 999 call transcript that we have, which you've identified there. Now, if we go to page 103 and look at paragraph 565, we know from that Mary Mendy was recovered from the 13th floor lobby. You see that?
Yes.
But there were no toxicology tests possible either for Khadija Say or Mary Mendy. Now, if we go to page 103, paragraph 560, there's a long paragraph there. If you go up, please scroll up, please. If you just read that to yourself, remind yourself of what you've said.
Yes, okay.
Are you able to estimate the latest time, in a window of time perhaps, in which Khadija Say and Mary Mendy would have been able safely to evacuate?
Okay, let's try and do that. So the sort of pointers I'm looking for is, did they leave the flat before or after the arrival of the exterior fire, as we've been discussing? And if so, how much after? And I'm sort of homing in on something like around 03:36 that they actually entered the stair, perhaps, or maybe a minute or two before that. And around about, and we've just said that from around about 0:29, I think we said, the exterior fire was out. The exterior fire had been outside their flat for up to about 16 minutes, around about this time. So they had remained in their flat for a period after the arrival of the exterior fire, but not for a long period. But it's likely they had some exposure from that, pre-exposure from that. Also, you read out reference to the fact that they'd shut the windows, and so they weren't ventilating the flat as other people had been, which would enhance the accumulation of smoke within the flat before they left it. So we have to take into consideration the conditions in their specific flat. So assuming they actually left at about 03:36, they succeeded in walking down for about 4 or 5 minutes in the stair for quite a number of floors. So they were well on their way down when they collapsed. So my interpretation of what's going on here is that, a bit like the previous case we've been discussing, there was some degree of pre-exposure, but perhaps not enormous, but some degree of pre-exposure in the flats before they left. Then we have this issue about how efficiently they crossed the lobby, but we're coming from a flat 3, so they shouldn't have had too much difficulty crossing the lobby. But we also had reference to the fact they'd made previous attempts when they'd been out into the lobby area and had some, which again adds to their accumulated pre-leaving the flat dose. And then at that point they then attempt to, with some degree of success, to negotiate and walk down the stair. So obviously by leaving at round about 03:36 was too late. If they'd left maybe 20 minutes or so earlier, they might have had some success in walking down.
So before the fire reached the exterior of the flat?
Yes. Yes.
Which it had done by possibly by 3:30, but certainly by 3:37.
Yes, but I think, as I say, that the special case for them is, again, that their flat was more contaminated than other flats 3, that some of the other flats 3 that we've discussed, which means that in order to survive, they've got to leave that much earlier, in other words, before that smoke accumulates in their flat.
Yeah. Now, if we go, please, to page 103, 561 to 564, just read those to yourself.
561 to 564.
Yes.
Yeah. So they weren't suffering from anything very much. They were still lucid, but their background levels in their blood were increasing around about then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you say in 563, having left, that they were able to descend several floors in the stair until Mary Mendy collapsed and died on the stair at the 13th floor level, while her daughter Khadija Say was able to continue down to the 9th floor before she also collapsed and died in the stair.
Yes.
There was dense smoke in the 20th floor lobby and a significant and hazardous concentration of smoke and asphyxiant gases in the stair at this time, which added to the already accumulated dose in Khadija Say and her mother as they descended. The additional physical effort required to descend the stair compared to sitting in their flat would also have contributed to their collapse in the stair around this time.
Yes.
Now, two questions flow from that. First, are you able to give an estimated window of time of death for each of Khadija Say and Mary Mendy?
So first thing we have to try and estimate is the time of collapse. And if we say they entered the stair at, for example, 03:36, then the time required to descend those number of floors through smoke is going to be 4 or 5 minutes. So if we add 4 or 5 minutes onto that, that takes us to the time of collapse in the stair, estimated at somewhere about 03:40/41, right? So at the 03:40/41, they are well, yes. So I'm starting with the time of 03:36 to enter this floor.
Yes.
I'm looking at 562 here. I've got another time mentioned there of 03:40. We don't know precisely when they entered the stair,
No.
but let's assume for a moment it's 03:36. Then the time of collapse is about 03:40, right? So 03:40, they've collapsed in the stair. They both have something of around about 30% carboxyhemoglobin in their blood. We don't have their COHBs at death for some reason. So we don't know what the level was at the time of their death. But it's likely to have been somewhere between 50 and 90% carboxyhemoglobin. So we have to allow time for that to accumulate after 3:40. So I think we should add something like 20 to 30 minutes so the earliest time of death might be something like 0400, right? And if they continued to breathe for a longer period, we might put something like 0410, 0420, something like that as the time they actually stop breathing. Obviously it's very approximate, but that's the sort of situation I think we're looking at.
And given the fact that Khadija, say, got lower in the building...
She went on for about another minute after her mother.
Before collapse?
Yes.
Are you able to say who died first, whether Khadija or Mary?
No. And from memory, I mean, another variable in uptake is body size. And from memory, one of these persons had a high body weight, which would take longer to accumulate a dose in. So that's another factor that may have affected this case to some extent.
Right. I think that was Khadija.
Yeah.
Right. Now, yes, thank you. Then let's turn to another flat, another floor, another occupant, Vincent Shagina, flat 144 on floor 17. You've set out the relevant facts in section 6 from page 122. If we go to 122, please.
Flat 144.
And you say there at paragraph 665, page 122, Vincent Shagina was alone in flat 144 on 14th June 2017. His remains were recovered from the living room area of flat 144 near the window. And then you say under conditions, although the movements of Vincent Shagina are unknown, it is likely that he was awake and conscious at some time during the fire, since his remains were recovered from the living room rather than the bedroom, and the living room would have been the last area affected by the exterior fire after the bedroom and kitchen. The flat was burnt out with essentially all combustible material consumed. And then if you go down to 667, you've got the analysis of the external fire spread over the west face of the tower. And for flat 144, you have the timing. First bullet point at the foot there is 3:32. Exterior fire had spread across column B1, but not yet reached flat 144. And if we turn the page to page 123, 3:39, it had started to spread outside flat 144 bedroom, and by 3:44, established outside the bedroom. By 3:58, the fire had spread outside the kitchen and was starting to affect the living room, and then the fire continued to spread across outside the living room until approximately 4:30. So that's the time chronology for the external fire spread. If we go then to 669, just below that, under the heading evidence from toxicology and pathology reports, you identify that the body Vincent Regina consisted of charred remains and soot, etc. And then you say in the last sentence that carboxyhemoglobin was detected at a level of approximately 39%, although this concentration should be regarded as an estimate due to the condition of the blood sample.
Yes.
Can you please go to page 124 then next and read your conclusions at paragraphs 672 to 674, just to remind yourself of what you say there.
Yeah, so the key timing on this set is 03:58, when the fire spread past his living room.
Yes. So, are you able to provide an estimated time of death for Vincent Regina?
Right. Right, so for Vincent Regina, we have not a particularly high blood carboxyhemoglobin, although as indicated there's an issue with the sample. So there's some uncertainty about what the true level of his blood was. It's still a high dose and an incapacitating dose. But we also have some pathology indicating some possible heat exposure.
Yes,
so he's
674.
I'll go back and look at it again if we need to. But he is one of the very few, if perhaps the only person that I think I've said that some significant heat exposure may have occurred. And this would have been when the fire spread, or after the fire spread outside his living room. So we're talking about collapse. Assuming he collapsed due to the asphyxiant gases, which are high enough certainly to do that, we would expect collapse to have occurred sometime around about 0400 to 0405-ish, something like that. That's collapse, at which time he would have had about 40%. Well, you've expected him to have had in reality, about 40% carboxyhemoglobin in his blood, if it was purely due to the smoke. And then one would, well, it's possible to die at these lower levels. It depends on your individual susceptibility. And ruling out, even if we rule out the possible contribution of heat. So he may have died as early as about, what did I just say,
0400 to 0405.
Yes. He could have died as early as that. Or if he died, if that CHB is wrong, if you like, and he went on to go above 50% carboxyhemoglobin in reality, then we want to add a few minutes to that. But I think this particular case, we have some issues about the heat exposure.
And what effect would the inhalation of hot gases have had before death?
Yes. Well, I have gone into this topic obviously quite a lot in my work, and this is where we have quite complicated situations going on, unlimited information, as you might imagine. And you might find this a bit distressing, but the key studies that were done on this kind of situation many, many years ago, I think in the 1940s, by a gentleman called Dr. Moritz, who exposed pigs to, anaesthetised pigs, I used to add, to extreme heat conditions to measure the time to death for various heat exposures. Now, what he discovered was that death tended to occur when the temperature of the blood entering the heart increased by a certain number of degrees. It was a few degrees centigrade, I forget the exact figure. And after the time of severe burns, that could take some minutes. So if if the temperatures, if the exposure to heat was extreme, we'll be talking about some minutes to death due to basically a heart attack is the main actual cause of death from heat exposure, instant death, rapid death at the scene from heat exposure and severe burns. But in order to acquire a dose sufficient to do that, and I have got some charts I could show you on this that I did bring with me. We have on our document list. There's a considerable difference between the time to pain from heat exposure and a bit like the gases, the effect of heat is a dose-related phenomenon. And so the dose, if you like, in terms of temperature and time to get first, second and third degree full thickness burns goes up by a factor of 3 by each burn severity. So you have to be exposed to quite severe heat conditions for some time to get these severe burns, which is why in most cases, because the heat and the gases are, if you like, racing together, and in most cases the gases get to you first. We're not seeing, particularly in these Grenfell cases, that people are being overcome by heat before they become comatose due to gases. So it's likely that he was comatose before, if he was exposed to a lot of heat, before he was exposed to a lot of heat. I'm struggling a bit, as you can see, with this, because it's quite difficult to say. Can we just go back to the pathology again to remind me how badly these burns were?
Yes, let's just do that. I can show you that. You can see 669 on page 123. We'll show you that, I think.
Yeah, so there, unfortunately, was only charred remains and limited tissues remained. But the pathologist was able to identify soot. So he had, again, a sign that he spent considerable time inhaling smoke before he died. So he wasn't killed by rapid exposure to flames. So we're certain of that.
Right.
The relation of hot smoke. And there was pulmonary edema and hemorrhage. So I think there is some indication that he was inhaling some hot gases at the time of death. But at the same time, he has a considerable uptake dose of carboxyhemoglobin. So it's possible that he died purely from the gases, and this is a sort of secondary finding, or it's possible that he became comatose due to the gases, and then the heat started to become significant in addition to the gases, or at the same time as the gases at the time of his death. I think we're talking about relatively few minutes here. So we were saying incapacitation at 04:05, weren't we?
Yes.
So we might say death is likely to have occurred within a further 10 minutes or so. Is that helpful enough?
Yes.
It's very difficult, this.
Yes, I understand. And if we look at paragraph 670, you also identify the fact that it's possible, this is 2/3 of the way through the paragraph, that his mild coronary artery atheroma may also somewhat have increased his susceptibility to carbon monoxide.
I was looking for that and I couldn't see where I'd written it. Yes, so in addition to that, he had heart disease, which is, as we've already discussed, a risk factor for collapse and death at a lower carboxyhemoglobin concentration.
Yes.
I thought I'd read that somewhere, and I thank you for bringing that to my attention again. So this is another thing to put into the mix, and again, it narrows that time down to not long after the arrival of the exterior fire at 03:58. Yes. So we're talking about a fairly short window, I feel, here.
Thank you. No, thank you. Now, you referred to some graphs, heat graphs. I feel I ought just to show you them, just in case there's something you can tell us of extra value from them, so that no stone is left unturned, so to speak. It's DAPR 603 at page 28.
Yes, I had included these in my 2018
Yeah.
slide presentation.
Yes, that's
We have
right.
seen them
That's
before.
where they come from, I think.
Yeah.
That's right. And I'm looking at page
Oh, yeah, we
28
are. Sorry, yes.
on the
Right,
screen.
so-
Is that what you were after?
Yes, thank you. Yes. So the right-hand one, these are experimental results from human exposures. So the right-hand one is showing time of tolerance to heat before a subject experiences pain or incapacitation from heat. Now, the suffering from pain to the skin from heat occurs at temperatures of air temperatures. Sorry, let me just give you a bit of background. The right-hand set of data are for human volunteers who went into a room under hot, heated air conditions. I think they were unclothed. So these are unclothed people in a sort of sauna-y situation, except there's no steam, it's just hot air. So in hot air, so they're obtaining heat by contact with hot air. They're bathing in, if you like, in hot air. And once the temperature of that air gets above 121 centigrade, then after a period of time, sufficient dose, if you like, of heat is taken up by the skin and the body that you start to feel pain. And you can see that at 121 degrees, that happens after about 7 or 8 minutes of exposure. That's the onset of pain. If the temperature is below 121, you don't experience any pain, but eventually your body core temperature increases and you suffer from hyperthermia. And you may recall cases where Marines exercising on Dartmoor with heavy clothing have died from hypothermia, a very dangerous condition that can occur just from being exposed too long to too much heat. So in case of fires, we're mostly concerned with the higher temperatures where you might be exposed to heat, hot gases or smoke, and suffer from pain. Now, so this curve is a useful curve for predicting tolerance in a design context for how high a temperature dare we let in a particular compartment the temperature get and still expect people to escape without suffering pain or difficulty.
Professor, can I just interrupt you?
Yes, sorry.
In a nutshell, how does that help us understand the cause?
Well, the left-hand one shows the effect of radiant heat. And this is where people will stand in front of a radiant heat panel. So now the air isn't hot, but the heat from the flames is radiating towards them. And this is the axis here is in terms of kilowatts per meter squared instant heat flux. And what I draw your attention to is the 3 curves. And the left-hand curve, the green one, is time to pain. The blue is time to 2nd degree burns. And the red is to time to 3rd degree full thickness burns. And you can see that, for example, at 10 kilowatts per meter squared, the time difference between the time to pain and that before you start to experience actual burns is quite large. So really this emphasizes the fact that if you're exposed to hot conditions, you have to be exposed for some considerable time before there's sufficient uptake of heat by the body to cause a really serious problem. That's really the only point I'm making here. Right. And I would use this in my FED calculations normally, yeah.
Let's then turn to a different flat, different floor, different occupant. Joseph Daniels, flat 135, floor 16. Can we please go back to your report, please, at section 6, page 126. Now, Joseph Daniels lived at flat 135 on floor 16 with his son, Sam Daniels.
Oh, yes.
And you've recorded your analysis and your conclusions about Joseph Daniels from page 126 onwards here, as you can see, paragraph 6, 7, 8. You've got the details there at 6, 7, 9 about the conditions in flat 135. Can we please go to page 126, paragraphs 683 to 686? So foot of page 126, 683, and just remind yourself of what you say there. And then turn the page,
yes,
please, to 127 and read down to 686.
Yes, I recall this.
Yes.
Carry on.
Thank you. And then if we go to page 128 and look at paragraph 691, under conclusions, you say there, you look at your conclusions, and you say Joseph Daniels remained in flat 135 when his son Samuel Daniels left the flat, entered and crossed dense smoke in the 16th lobby, and then entered the stair in an attempt to find assistance to evacuate his father. Samuel Daniels stated that he left the flat entrance door open when he left the flat so that his father could follow him. If the door remained open for several minutes, flat 135 would have filled rapidly with very toxic smoke from the lobby. When firefighters checked, they found the door shut, so it's likely that Joseph Daniels shut the door before sheltering in the living room. And then at 692, you go on to say that once the flat entrance door was closed, there may have been some continued slow smoke penetration from the lobby, but exposure to toxic smoke and uptake of asphyxiant gases should have been limited, as in other flats, until the exterior fire spread outside bedrooms from 0234, when increased penetration of smoke into the flat would have resulted in more rapid uptake of asphyxiates. And then you go on, exposure would then have increased very rapidly once the exterior fire spread outside the living room, resulting in incapacitation due to inhalation of carbon monoxide and some hydrogen cyanide, leading to death from asphyxiation following further exposure. Evidence of inhalation of asphyxiant gases is provided by the presence of carboxyhemoglobin in his tissues and soot in his airways. These findings were considered consistent with death due to the effects of fire, most likely from the asphyxiant effects of inhalation of fumes.
That's the pathologist's conclusion, yes.
Yes. Now, my question for you is whether you can provide a window for the time of death based on two hypotheses. First of all, the front door being left open, and second, it being shut.
Yes, so we know that Joseph left at 01:25, don't we? Around 01:25. So, and the conditions were already quite bad in the lobby at that time. So if that door remained open, and of course we remember that his father had some quite serious health, basically behavioural and mental health problems. So, if he left the door open and just withdrew into the flat, leaving the door open, and it didn't close, then there's in danger the flat would be flooded within a few minutes with this dense smoke from the lobby, and that over another, without doing the calculations, over another 5-10 minutes or so, he could have been exposed to incapacitating conditions, and then another for 10 minutes or so to have died in the flat if the door had been left open throughout. If the door was closed, then the conditions in flat 135 should be somewhat similar to those in other flats 5, and the key point we're looking for is when did the exterior fire spread past that flat on outside it, and the figure we've got at the moment in front of us is 0234 when it spread outside the bedrooms. About 20 minutes or so after that, it would be coming past the living room. So yes, that takes us to 0245-ish for the fire outside the living room, unless we've got, without looking it up, I think that's probably about right.
686 on page 127.
Is that, am I?
You are,
Is it
more or less.
Yeah. So about 245 is when conditions were starting to become extreme, and within 10 minutes so of that, he's likely to become unconscious. So let's say, this is very rapid thinking going on here. So 0255-ish, incapacitation, and then 0315, we're getting into the lethal territory.
And is that on the hypothesis that the front door was shut?
That's on the hypothesis it was shut, yes.
And if it was open?
And so it's open. So we've got 0125, the door was open, started to be open, and the flat started to fill with smoke. Say 0135, incapacitation. I'm doing this on the fly here. 01 let's say, let's put a window up to about 0200-ish. We're looking for death around about 0200, 0215, something like that.
Why were you unable to provide a time of death in your report?
I don't know that I was particularly because it's such an inexact thing to try to do, and obviously in my report I'm really concentrating on the time of incapacitation and the latest times when you might be rescued or survive. So as we discussed, the time at which breathing and circulation actually cease is a very indeterminate, and you've already passed the point of no return. So I didn't feel, in this case, I hadn't tried to calculate it. But what I just said, was that helpful?
Yes, and particularly in the absence of any measured compost hemoglobin in the blood.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
It's very uncertain, I think, in this case, because we don't really know exactly what was going on in that flat.
Then let's turn to another floor, another flat, another occupant. Steve Power in flat 122 on floor 15. Can we go to page 132? 132. And the overview says, or records, that Steve Power was in the flat 122. And if you go to the overview, a little bit further down, please, at paragraph 713, apologies. Flat 122, Rebecca Ross and Stephen Power were both present in flat 122 on 14th of June. Rebecca Ross was able to evacuate at 2:53, but her father, Stephen Power, remained in the flat. I've relied on her description of the conditions in flat 122 up until her evacuation and analysis of the spread of fire to analyse the causes of incapacitation and death of Stephen Power. And I'm going to pick through the. If you look at page 135 and pick through paragraphs 724 to 731, there's quite a lot there. Just remind yourself of what you've said there. You could probably pick it up at paragraph 726 to 222 to 248 when the flat suddenly filled with smoke.
Yes, I remember her description of the conditions.
Yes.
Yes. So, like these other flats too, they were sheltering essentially in the bedrooms, and then the smoke and fire was coming through the kitchen.
If you just remind yourself of what you say there, down to paragraph 731, please. Right, so the key point is that she left the flat at around about 02:49 at a time when conditions were deteriorating very rapidly. And I remember from her account that her father was very reluctant to leave the flat, and I think there were some dogs involved as well. He wanted to stay with the family pets or something. Yes.
And so from 02:49, he was exposed to quite extreme conditions. So I've said here, I consider Stephen Power would have been exposed to concentrations likely to cause loss of consciousness within a few minutes after she left at 02:49. During these minutes after 2:49, and especially after 03:12, when the exterior fire then spread around the bedroom. So it's coming from two directions. Then that's when the conditions would have been very bad and he'd like to have died. So I think we can estimate he may still have been alive up to 03:12. Yes? What comes on the next page? Anything?
If we turn the page, please, and look at page 136. That your conclusion.
Yeah, so he did suffer some mild heat-related damage. But there was a health condition, wasn't there? Didn't I note that he had heart issues?
Paragraph...
Based on his pre-existing health condition, sorry.
Yes, page 135, paragraph 730. You identify his...
Yeah, he had coronary artery disease.
Yeah.
So that would tend to make him collapse at a lower carboxyhemoglobin than might otherwise have occurred.
Yes.
So I think we're looking at the window sort of maybe 0315 to 0400, something like that.
For the time of death?
Yes.
Yes. And incapacitation, you say not long after 248?
Yes.
Now, can we go, please, to DAPR 605? This is back to a part of your report we were looking at yesterday. DAPR 605, section 5, page 131. This is where you deal with Stephen Power in this part of your report.
Right.
And you can see that you say that in paragraph 540 that the flat filled with irritant smoke. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, and Rebecca evacuated at 2:49. What effects, including psychological effects or behavioural effects, would the irritant smoke have had on Steve Power between 2:23 and 2:49 when Rebecca Ross left?
I think this is a particular behavioural case, if you like, in that throughout this period, Rebecca was quite keen for them both to evacuate the flat from an early stage, and he was this is nothing to do with particularly. He was very reluctant to do so.
No, my question is not the social effects or wider effects, but it's the irritant smoke.
Well,
what effects would that have had?
Okay. Well, it would behaviourally it would further deter any attempts he might have considered in escaping. It would make things distressing and uncomfortable. But what we're really, I think we really need to focus on here is the fact that we were going to have high concentrations of asphyxiant gases, which is then going to inhale and collapse.
And at 541, you've identified in the about halfway through the paragraph that the lining of the trachea showed evidence of mild heat-related damage occurring in life, in keeping with inhaling hot fumes prior to death.
Yes.
And similar to Vincent Gina, which we looked at before, his case.
They've got quite a lot of similarities because they've both got coronary artery disease as well, haven't they?
Well, I was going to ask you just to answer the question again in respect of Steve Power. What would have been the effects of the inhalation of the hot gases before his death on what you can see from the smoke in the flat?
Right. I'm not sure that the inhalation of hot gases in these two cases has necessarily hastened death. Obviously, it's going to be painful and distressing. It's another factor that may have contributed. But the fact that, well, although it could have, I suppose, affected their possibility of having a heart attack, as we talked about earlier with the pig experiments. So it could have caused them to have some kind of fatal circulatory collapse at an inhaled carboxyhemoglobin dose, because that's also contributing to this effects on the heart, because the carbon monoxide is interfering with oxygen supply to the heart muscle and everything. So we have a combination of things here coming in. The other thing is, of course, that I've just said that the conditions in terms of heat and fire penetration if he was in the bedroom were going to deteriorate quite rapidly after 3:15 when the fire came round to that bedroom, outside that bedroom. So then that's when we would expect hot gases in the bedroom. And we now have some evidence that he may have inhaled hot gases, which suggests he may still have been alive around about 3:15. So it's an indicator rather than a cause of anything. It's a signal to us.
Yes.
Am I getting anywhere? Are we getting there?
Thank you very much.
Yes.
That is very helpful indeed.
So I think, we're talking about sometime 3:15 to 4 o'clock death, and there are several factors coinciding here. We seem to have inhalation of hot gases. We've certainly got a significant, we've got no COHB. Oh, There was evidence of CHB in his blood, but didn't get a value. But so he had inhaled and would have inhaled significant amounts of asphyxiant gases. He was predisposed to problems because of his pre-existing heart condition. So that sums it up.
Yes, thank you. That sums it up. Thank you very much, Professor. Mr. Chairman, is now a convenient moment for the lunch break.
Yes, it is, Mr. Bennett. Thank you very much. We'll break them, Professor Purser, so we can all have some lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock, please. And as before, please don't discuss your evidence with anyone while you're away.
I understand.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. 2 o'clock then, please. Thank you.